Hi, Prof.
Okay, I think we're live. Um, so I hope people are logged on and watching. I just wanted to say hi. Thank you so much for joining us. I think a round of introductions first before we get into it. I'm Bella Perez Rubio. I'm the reporter for Teka Teka News, one of the reporters for Teka Teka News. Yeah, so Sir Robbie, if you want to go next.
I'm Robbie Alampay. I apologize. I think everybody can see I'm inside my car. I'm literally across the street from the parking from the office. But talagang inabutan na dito. But anyway, thank you for joining us.
Hmm. Sandra?
Yeah. For those that don't know me, I'm a journalist from Denmark, an investigative media in Denmark.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I don't know what you want me to say, Bella.
That's good. That's good.
Okay,
Just like quick introduction.
sure.
Professor Mangada.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Lady Lynn Mangada from UP Tacloban. So I met Bella here in Tacloban. I don't know if Sandra was here in
I was
Tacloban
there.
during the
Yeah.
second
Mm,
visit of Bella.
Hmm.
mm,
Okay.
yeah. Thank you. Okay. I also want to remind everyone who might be watching, you can send in questions throughout the discussion. So if something stands out to you, if you want to hear more about something, you can DM us on Twitter if you're a bit shy, or you can send in a comment, and our comms team will ping us and let us know. Yeah. Okay. Before we get into anything serious, as Professor Mangada mentioned, it's been a while since me, Sandra, and her were all in the same room together. That was about 2 months ago. And Sandra's back in Denmark. So I just wanted to ask the both of you how you've been doing since then. How are things?
I've been busy and
Mm,
sick. Um, Denmark has a lot of sickness at the moment, COVID-19 and yeah, just viruses. So I've been sick a lot, but busy. So all in all, I'm
mm.
good. Yeah.
Okay, good to know. Professor Mangada, how are you? You're in
Uh,
Tacloban.
I'm in Tacloban, and like Sandra, I'm also busy because it's the Christmas season, and people are rushing at the same time. It's almost
Hmm.
the end of the semester. So
Mm,
I'm attending to the papers of my students, meeting these people, especially those with deficiencies.
mm. Okay, okay.
But how
Oh,
about you, Bella? How are you?
I'm good. Mostly actually since we last saw each other, of course, working on the three stories that we've put
Hmm.
out since we parted ways in October. But mostly good. I'm happy that the stories are finally out. I hope you're all happy with them too. I actually haven't been able to talk to Professor Mangada and ask what she thinks, so I'm glad that we have the chance to sit down with her today because she figures so much in the story. So
Hmm.
yeah. Okay, I actually just wanted to give people more time to come in and join, but I think it's been a few minutes and we can, really get started now. The first thing I wanted to ask Professor Mangada is the 10-year anniversary of Haiyan, Typhoon Yolanda, was last month, and you were the only one of us who were in Tacloban for that. So I wanted to ask you, how was the 10-year anniversary, the actual day, November 8th, right?
Okay.
Kamusta
So
sa Tacloban? Yeah.
because it's the 10th year,
Mm,
there were a lot of activities. So
mm,
there were exhibits, there were, what's this, webinars also being conducted. And
mm,
then practically, because I belong to the education sector, the HUCs, rather the HEIs, the higher education institutions. So per university, it has a particular, what's this, way of remembering Yolanda. For us in
Mm.
UP Tacloban, it took a month of, remembering Yolanda. So plenty of activities for the whole month of November. So we had Lunop. It's a show. Then we have conferences. Then another forum in school on coastal risk reduction.
Mm.
So it was quite a day to remember, or a month to remember. I think
Mm.
I do not know if people simply want to exaggerate the 10th year anniversary, because in the past we do not have that kind of celebration. What was the common practice or activity was the visit to Anibong, where you can see uh, the vessels that were pushed inward, and then the president was here. They went to in Sagkahan, the Astrodome. I hope you visited them, where
Yeah,
we have there the installation of the Yolanda. So people were there. There were some music.
yeah. But I also wanted to know, how did it feel any different in the city? Because I noticed, of course, when I was talking to people, their memories are still so vivid. So did it feel like there was weight on that day because it was the 10-year anniversary, or did it feel the same lang?
Mm, for people in the north, I think they were looking forward on the release more
Mm,
titles, proof of ownership to the dwelling units that they are staying. But
yeah.
I think there were only few releases, and
Mm,
the act of giving out the titles is scheduled, sometimes monthly, quarterly, and sometimes uh, 10 or less than 20 people would be given or would receive their titles.
yeah. Just to clarify for our listeners, when Professor Mangada says the North, she means the relocated survivors of Typhoon Haiyan who are living in relocation sites, housing. That's north
Yeah.
of
Mm.
Tacloban, just so that they know. And yeah, I did know that the city was rushing to give out those titles because when we went in to interview one of the city housing officials, that's what he was doing. He was signing titles as we were walking in kasi naghahabol daw sila. So, yeah.
Yes.
Mm. Anyway, I wanted to ask also, Sandra,
Hmm.
your trip to Tacloban was your first time, not only to Tacloban but the Philippines,
Yeah.
um, in October. What were your
Hmm.
initial impressions of Tacloban in the days that we were there?
Um, I think it was a mix between really good people and people who um, were frustrated, if that
Mm,
makes sense. Um, I think it was a mix actually. I was also a bit surprised. 10 years ago, this huge typhoon hit them, but
mm,
somehow people always um, move not move on, but um, yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but I guess I think it was a mix, yeah,
mm,
between despair in some ways, but also that life goes on because it has
mm.
to go on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to also, so we can hear from Sir Robbie, I do know that in the weeks or months immediately after Yolanda hit, you were there on the ground, right? Do I remember that correctly?
Ako? Yes, I was
Yeah.
there. I was actually in one of the first
Mm,
flights that were able to come in.
mm,
But this was, I mean, if just to bring people back
yeah.
to the memory of those days, and Professor would also have her memories of that. But coming, my memory of it coming from outside, no, not as
Mm,
a resident of Tacloban, and as a media person, as a journalist, was we had to wait, of course. for the airport to open.
Mm.
Um, and that took a long time. I think it took more than a week before any kind of even humanitarian flights could come in. Obviously, the military flights were the first to come in. Um, uh, the planes from government, from Malacanang, from DILG, of course, those were the first to come in. But in terms of bringing in civilians, humanitarian aid, and even for media, it took a while. Most of the media, in fact, that first came to Tacloban had to travel by land.
Mm.
I came in by plane, and when we landed, the airport was literally still not an airport. There was nothing there, and nothing really could prepare us for at that time. Mostly what we could hear.
Yeah.
We had heard that houses were wiped out. We had heard that initially that there were still a lot of corpses, a lot of bodies still being picked up, and this was
Yeah.
about a week into it already. And I remember going around with journalists. There was still a lot of chaos, still a lot of people desperate for materials and
Mm.
resources, and very limited electricity still
Mm.
around the city, limited access also to telecommunications. That's what I remember most as I came in.
Mm. Yeah, something that really struck me about talking to everyone that we spoke to, a lot of Tacloban City residents who have since been relocated or moved back to the coastal area, everyone has such vivid memories of Tacloban, not just on the day that Yolanda struck, but even in the days, the weeks um, after. Everyone has their own very detailed, harrowing story. And I think, Professor Mangada, you were actually there when Yolanda struck. What was it like for you? That's something we actually weren't able to talk about in all the conversations we've had personally. What was it like for you?
Okay. I think I mentioned this to you that uh, a day before Yolanda
Mm.
devastated Tacloban City, I was in Borongan because I was conducting a field work, and actually, uh, I was also scheduled to go to Southern Leyte for another field work, and
Mm.
sponsored by Plan Philippines, and they were checking on me if I would be proceeding to Southern Leyte after my
Mm.
stint in Borongan, and they were asking me about the weather in Borongan. I said it was very warm. I said very warm, and it was good that I was able to come home. I think from Borongan I arrived around 4 or 5, and I didn't went home straight. I had coffee in downtown, and I by the time na siguro around 6 or 6:30, there were news. Although while having coffee in downtown, uh, the TV screen was already flashing about Haiyan, and that it was a super typhoon.
Mm.
So, as I've been sharing this experience of mine, I was not really bothered because we've been used to super typhoon, to advisory regarding super typhoon. But when I went home, when I also opened the television, um, I think it was President Aquino who was appealing, who was giving us an update, and was his face was quite sad already, and he was saying that people should prepare, people should evacuate because it's really a strong typhoon.
Mm.
Mm.
So that's what I recall.
Yeah,
Of course,
Prof, yeah, if sorry, Professor, but if you don't mind, what I wanted to ask you also was because this whole time you've been there, di ba?
yeah.
Mm.
Um, and 10 years later, if you recall now the amount of devastation for those of us coming in from outside, it's easy to have to see, the contrast of what we were reading about, what we were seeing before, and then what we got to see when we visited Tacloban. But for you who's been there every single day, and not only living and walking the streets, but even following the data and doing the research of everything, does it everything that has happened or doesn't happen, does it surprise you over 10 years now that we have this occasion to look back? Is there anything that surprises you, or did everything just organically become part of your life na it's actually hard to be objective about what has changed?
Um, Actually, I am just curious uh, why people in the north, those who were relocated, did not really amplify their voices about the conditions that they are currently in. For instance, especially the first 5 years when they have to suffer about loss of income, where they have to sacrifice uh, not sending their children to school because there was no uh, learning facility there. And today, it's not only the people in the north who is complaining, although still our voices are not really that strong about the problem on water.
Mm.
Okay, so aside from water, that we are all no, the problematic supply of water that we're experiencing. The other hot issue now is the construction of the causeway. Before the causeway, it's the tide embankment. I do not know if Bella and Sandra, if they went to San Jose along the beach
Mm.
side near the airport where they can see the sea wall.
Mm.
So if you ask people who are currently living in that area, especially the fishers, they would really tell you that the seawall or the tide embankment as we call it here is not helping them. It
Mm.
actually blocked their livelihood. The seawall actually gives them difficulty in securing their boats during bad weather. But for other citizens, for other what's this residents living in that area, I think they have relaxed because they
Yeah.
feel confident that the seawall will protect them against the storm surge,
Yeah.
against the big waves. It's more of the fishers who are really affected. But for other businesses, uh, based on my research, not much enterprise or enterprises have been established. So it's not actually enticing or attracting tourists because it was actually also the embankment was also intended to attract tourists or visitors, but there's
Mm.
none. They claim there's none. So purely it's a protection for against the storm surge. Related to that is the causeway that starts from the city hall, then that crosses to the airport, where for me it is an initial attempt to undertake reclamation effort of the city because they plan to reclaim Kangkabatok Bay, and for them reclamation is a good mitigation intervention.
Mm.
So that's these are the issues now.
Yeah.
As far as the issues in Tacloban North, I think maybe for some people they got tired because even up to now they have not received their titles or
Mm.
proof of ownership. Most of them do not have a livelihood. In fact, the residents in living in the tide embankment, they have houses. Actually, they were given houses in Tacloban North, but still they go back
Yeah.
because there is no opportunity for them to earn. So
Mm.
that's really the downside.
Mm.
Yeah.
Maybe at that time because maybe the officials were panicking and their intention was only to remove and secure the people from the coast from typhoon and storm surge.
Mm.
That's why they did not factor in the other necessities for people to live with dignity in the resettlement. So
Yeah.
these are the issues now.
Mm.
Mhm. Thank you for that. I think also just so that our listeners can follow a bit better in case they're having any trouble. In case you haven't listened to our three-part series, the main focus is really or really has been checking in on Tacloban 10 years after Haiyan. And what we really focused on was the housing effort, as the biggest and most long running component of the rehabilitation effort of the government after Haiyan. So, what we really focused on was Tacloban North, as Professor Mangada mentioned, where most survivors of Haiyan were relocated. She was also talking about, how everyone has been moved away from the coast, which is also the city center, meaning, the center of commerce, where all the malls are, where most people used to live. So that's what we're talking about. And Professor Mangada also mentioned, the substandard housing. She mentioned that residents are tired because, as she said, this has been a problem for many years now, and some of us are just um, now starting to wrap our heads around the extent of how substandard or how lacking the housing situation of some of the Haiyan survivors has been. And it's not just a matter of quality, but also the distance from the city center, where some of them fish, some of them work in department stores, used to have stores there. So just so that our listeners can follow better. But
Mm.
back to Professor Mangada, if you can quickly walk us through, substandard is not a term that I you know I decided to use on my own. I actually came to it because the city mayor, um I think a year ago, said that 70% of housing in Tacloban City for Yolanda survivors is substandard. So when he says the word substandard, as someone who has been researching the housing effort for many years now, what does that actually look like? Can you walk our viewers through?
Uh, Generally, when we speak of substandard, this is the context.
Mm,
Upon the transfer of the survivor, they would notice that the walls are cracked,
mm,
uh, and then not the not functional comfort room, and
yeah.
then comfort room, and then they also observe that uh, after the walls have cracked, they did not see what's this steel bar. Instead, it's a bamboo uh, that was used, and then you have leaking roofs.
Mm,
So these are the common what's this complaints of people.
Mm.
yeah.
So,
And then,
What
of
about
course,
you?
yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask also. What about you, Bella and Sandra? You
Mm,
went to Tacloban. You came in with that. Well, let's call it a technical term, substandard. So,
mm,
what do you connect now with that word of? And just to repeat that, it was the mayor
mm.
who acknowledged that the housings are substandard. From what you saw and from what you um, heard from the residents themselves, what do you now associate with that term of substandard?
For me, or Sandra, do you wanna?
No, you can go first.
Okay,
That's okay.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
for me, it's something that Professor Mangada mentioned a few minutes earlier. It's the lack of access to water. What really comes to mind when I think of that term substandard is this housing site, Villa Diana, that was built by the National Housing Authority. They have not had access to running water since they moved in 2016. So when I first came to Tacloban City earlier this year, that that was one of course, one of the worst things that I heard. And they were paying such a premium just for all their water needs, and they were paying it on a daily basis. So buying gallons of water and spending, half half a day's salary on just their water expenses, and then the other half was going to transportation costs because everyone who's been relocated lives at least 30 minutes away by car from
Mm.
the city center. But yeah, really the lack of access to running water. And I remember asking Professor Mangada the next time we visited if the water situation actually got worse. Because when I first came, it seemed like Villa Diana was a standout in terms of access to water. But then the next time we went, we heard from almost everyone that we spoke to that they had problems with running water. A lot of people who said we haven't had running water in a year, a couple of years. So for me, that's the standout.
Mm. Um, I agree, but for me, it's also, substandard. If we talk about the word itself, it's so political. It's so neutral when you
Mm.
consider how um, many issues or how serious the issues are with the houses, right? So
Mm.
it's just because I saw the same as you, Bella, and
Yeah.
when I first heard the word substandard, I didn't actually know what it meant.
Mm.
So it's also a way to um, minimize the problems when you use the word substandard instead of problematic housing,
Yeah.
because it really is a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Or I guess if I were casually talking to a friend, I wouldn't, like you said, I wouldn't really use the word substandard. What I would say is a lot of what we saw was not really livable or very
Mm,
difficult
exactly.
to live in, to live
Mm,
with. Yeah.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
true.
you're right.
Uh,
Yeah. Another thing that we keep touching on also is, the distance from the city center. Professor Mangada, I was hoping you could explain, why is it such a big factor that, you know, or why is it affecting residents so much that they're about 30 to 40 minutes away? What's the general profile of the people who were relocated from the city center?
First, the so-called Tacloban North, or the resettlement area, used to be the agricultural land of side of Tacloban City. There were also
Mm.
farmers using the land. Uh, when Haiyan devastated us, uh, we were looking, especially the local government, they were looking for spaces to construct houses. So before, people were not interested to go to that side because it's really, for farming, for agriculture. Uh, that's why it's far. We grow our fruits, we grow our root crops, vegetables in that area. So it's the rural side of Tacloban. But Haiyan changed it because today it is now a resettlement site. In fact, currently, the development plan of the city would say it is the site for socialized housing.
Mm.
So it's very far from Tacloban. If you go, if you use private vehicle, you can reach it by 20 minutes. But if you take the bus, the public transport, it's from 30 to 45 minutes.
mm,
Mm.
And some would spend 100 pesos back and forth. Others would spend 80 pesos for transportation, and that is
Mm.
enough. In fact, uh, for some who do not earn much, like the ones selling peanuts, etc., some of them would not go home. They would rather spend
Mm.
the night here in Tacloban, just in the parks,
Mm.
because uh, the transportation cost alone would eat up their sales for
mm,
the day. For the fishers, they do not go home daily, but rather they go home weekly or twice a month.
Yeah.
They For the fishers, they actually constructed makeshift houses in
Yeah.
the coast.
mm,
So
Yeah.
that's how expensive it is to be flying or going home to Tacloban North.
Mm.
Hmm. If you don't mind, I mean, there were two aspects, two levels to the story with the
Mm,
podcast. And again, we just want to repeat that this is a collaboration between Puma
mm,
Podcast, our Teka Teka team, and Dan Watch. Dan Watch is an investigative journalism group in in Copenhagen. We did get support here from Journalism EU to
Mm.
conduct this investigation. But there were two levels to the story. One is what we've been discussing, the
yeah.
human level to it, and how people have been coping, struggling.
Mm.
Some are surviving, and we have to say there are people who benefited from government housing. They
Mm,
are thankful for what they've gotten, such as it is. No? I guess coming from the devastation and so on, we don't want to minimize the help that they got also. But that's just an inevitable conclusion when when government itself, not just the mayor, National Housing Authority, we heard that in the story, di ba?
mm,
National Housing Authority in the region was also acknowledging this is not the ideal thing to be giving out to people,
mm.
uh, livelihood impact. But the other level to the story in the course of the investigation became the story itself. I mean, that was my impression listening to the podcast was about how hard it was to even get a good grasp of how the money for all of this was spent.
Mm.
Uh, I, I mean, let me ask you, Sandra, Bella, and this is where your job as journalists intersect with Professor Mangada as an academic, as a researcher. It really intersected in the search for data.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
but could you talk about that a bit? I mean, were you surprised first of all at how sparse and how difficult it seemed to be listening to the story just to get hard data on how the money was spent for housing?
Yeah. I had an idea of how hard it might be because when I was first in Tacloban, I did ask Professor Mangada, if she had any luck in terms of tracking foreign funding. Because as Sir Robbie mentioned, that was one of the major goals of this story, as we were starting out, is we wanted to find out all that money that poured in immediately after Yolanda. At least we were seeing reports of all of these countries
Mm.
pledging millions and millions of dollars to Yolanda survivors. What happened to that so many years later? And I did have an idea of how hard it would be because I asked Professor Mangada and she essentially told me, no luck in terms of that. Because Professor Mangada has been researching the rehabilitation effort for many years now, but maybe it's better for her to tell us, how hard it's been for her in these last few years to get an idea of where all that money went.
Uh-huh. Okay, so money, money, money. If only we just sing ABBA. Yes, it's truly difficult because, as we all know, all international money, overseas donations, were deposited to a particular account in DOF. I do not know who's handling, but it's the Department of Finance. And they said they even have a problem identifying the donors. So that was what we got, what we heard from the news. For us here in Tacloban City, uh, we would say there were only two kinds of money: the government money and the non-government money,
Mm,
especially from the humanitarian, because the houses were constructed by the National Housing Authority, so we believe it's government money. We didn't even entertain that part of the government money is actually donation coming from outside.
mm,
And then we saw the construction of CRS, uh, UN, Habitat for Humanity, UNDP. So we say it's not government money, but there are only few units
mm.
compared to the houses constructed by
Mm.
NHA, National Housing Authority.
Yeah.
So when Belle asked me about if there would be a chance for us to track overseas money, I said I doubt because, for instance, in CRS, they have their own accounting system. I doubt if they're going to share the details of the money. I doubt if they're going to share the dollars of the money they spend for constructing the houses here.
Mm.
Same with other agencies. There's just the, no, the main actor like CRS, Habitat, UNDP, the donors. But as to the details, uh, they're quite mum about it. They're silent. They're quiet. On the part of the government, it's quite difficult because uh, it is being handled by DPWH. However, DPWH would get contractors, and these contractors would also get subcontractors to undertake the
Mm.
construction of the dwelling units because
Yeah.
they said 14,000 units is too huge to build. So these big contractors, some were not from Region 8, would get subcontractors. They would allow subcontracting. And so we do not know. While lately, they would say that per housing unit, the budget was around 200, pesos to 200,000. Well, if you would see the quality of the houses and the size of the dwelling units, I do not know if it would cost 200,000 pesos.
Yeah, but this is precisely why we then collaborated with you, Sandra, and our friends in Danwatch.
Yeah.
We, of course, it's one thing to track. We could have, I think, predicted how difficult it would be to track the money here on
Mm.
the spending side. But we really were quite confident. Europe will be a different game, and Danwatch can help to track the money, and we'll get all the
Mm.
reports and so on. It didn't actually quite end up that way. Could you tell us the
No.
process on your end?
Yeah. Yeah. Just to talk into that, I was actually surprised in how difficult it was to track those money, especially considering I think I can remember the correct number, but the EU and the EU
Yeah.
member states reached, I think they pledged over 100 million
Mm.
euros to after the Haiyan. And, you know, the EU is always is known for, transparent databases and transparent structures regarding money and money transferring or disbursements. But I got nothing at all. So just to talk about it, I requested for FOIAs, and I tried to talk with several EU spokespersons. I looked through databases, and what I wanted to know was who was the recipient of the money and what were the demands for giving the money. But I got nothing. After several
Mm.
months, I still haven't heard anything about it. So it was really a frustrating process, to be honest. Till this day, there is several FOIA requests I haven't got. So
Mhm.
I don't know if that's, yeah.
Let
Yeah.
me,
Just to clarify for our listeners, a
Of
FOIA
course.
request,
No, yeah.
As Sandra kept saying, a FOIA is a Freedom of Information Act request.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
uh, I'd like to share with you that in the Samar side, especially, I think in Hiporlos or Loan area. I think it's Hiporlos or Marabot area, where
Mm.
the donors for the housing units came from the Middle East. So
Mm.
Mm.
the structure of the housing units would reflect some of the
Mm.
maybe culture of the donor. So you could easily say, that's coming from the Middle East because of their of the design.
Mm.
Uh, I'm not really sure about one in, I think, Burawen. It's very far from Tacloban, almost more than an hour or
Mm.
1 hour from Tacloban, where they mentioned about putting a different color as a way of you know uh, identifying the donors. They said when the rooftop is red, it comes from countries that supported the left movement. It's
Mm.
Mm.
crazy. So I'm not
Mm.
sure if it's true, but they said the locals made that attempt that
Mm.
if the rooftop is red, green, this comes from this particular country, but it's not official.
Mm.
We
Yeah.
do not know. We have no way of validating it. So that's
Yeah.
the problem. Maybe if, for instance, if EU money was, transferred to
Mm.
like Save the Children, maybe this Save the Children can help you
Yeah.
Mm.
partnering with humanitarian organization. But as far as government offices are concerned, oh
Mm.
my God.
I,
Yeah.
most of the money went to NGOs like
Yeah.
the UN and Save the Children, but there were 40 million, or was it 30 million euros that went
30.
directly
Yeah.
to the Filipino government.
Yeah.
So I think most of the money we can account for, but there is one disbursement that we can't account for. Um,
Yeah.
so I
Just to
guess,
yeah,
yeah,
sorry,
sure.
just to give our viewers a better idea of this effort of trying to
Mm,
track all the money that came in. A lot of freedom of information requests also went out on my end to
mm,
obviously local government, I mean national and local government offices. Um, Not much better luck than Sandra. I did get responses, but sometimes the data was very old, like as of 2014, 2015. Sometimes they would point at another office, and then that next office would point to another office. But one thing that I did get was a very old figure, but at some point, the DBM in one of their responses to my freedom of information request said that about $1.3 billion or 73 billion pesos worth of aid was pledged to
mm,
survivors. So that's about the most comprehensive number that we have. Take it
mm,
with a grain of salt. It was part of a presentation that was sent to me by the DBM, and I could tell instantly that it was very old.
mm,
Definitely before 2016. So take that with a grain of salt, but that's pretty much what we know. So we kind of tried to work backwards from there. How much of that money went directly to the government, how much of that money went straight to NGOs who then
mm,
put that money in to themselves on the ground, building housing units or more immediate aid in the aftermath of Yolanda. But yeah, that really was the difficulty, because we do know that at least some of this money went directly to the Philippine government, as Sandra mentioned. On the
mm,
EU's end, there's at least 30 million euros that went straight to the government, and we don't know how much of that money went to the housing project, which you would think is the most important part of the rehabilitation effort.
mm,
So yeah, that really was the difficulty there.
mm. I'm
but for
wondering,
me,
Sandra. I'm wondering at your end,
mm,
um, if obviously here one of the impacts we were going for is for people to just ask, yeah, that's a good question. How was the money spent? Yes,
mm,
that's a good question. Why is the quality this way? And yes,
mm,
that's a good question. How can we use emergency funding in the future and even rehabilitation funding in the future to make sure that we also incorporate these other questions that professor is bringing up, like
mm,
distance. We have to take into consideration livelihood, and so forth. But at your end, at the level of the European Union and the European community, as
Mm,
essentially the taxpayers who released this money and who
mm,
donated this money. I'm wondering if there are questions therefore at the level that you're basically saying. I mean that because you said one of your questions in your FOIA was,
mm,
do we even have conditionalities? Were there at least clear conditionalities to the
mm,
grant so that we could ask these questions
mm.
objectively? I'm wondering if there might be people asking those questions now that stories like this come up.
Um, no, not right now. But I guess I think for me, this story illustrates a more structural problem in the EU. Um, when it comes to disbursement of money, especially considering the new loss and damage fund that COP 20
Mm.
made. Yeah, I guess um, I asked some experts about whether or not we have the systems to actually disperse money and how we um, help people um, in the global south when it comes to climate changes. And most of them tell me that we don't have the systems, we don't have the transparency we need
Mhm.
to do it. So I guess for me it's a more structural problem, and I think we will talk a lot more about it, and there will be more stories um, and questions around it um, this next couple of years. But right now, no.
Yeah. I'll jump
Unfortunately.
in. We only have a few minutes left, and we do have a few audience questions. So, question number one: were there any observations that you or I had, Sandra, or you, Professor Mangada, about the living situations for PWDs and senior citizens? Meaning, were there any special considerations taken? I would imagine. And what governing bodies could they have brought their concerns to, and were there any solutions?
Okay. Sadly, there were no distinction. Everybody was just treated as survivor.
Mm,
For instance, during the distribution of relief goods. So it's just for everyone, no distinction whether it's for elderly, for women, for children. We just got our canned goods, our noodles, our biscuit. As
mm,
far as housing is concerned, there was also no preference or
Mm,
special attention to like people with special needs, because in Tacloban North, actually, especially in GMA Kapuso,
mm,
uh, it was there where I saw a lot of children with special needs.
mm,
mm,
In fact, during one of my FGDs, uh, the parents expressed that maybe that's one of the good thing that happened to them was that they were able to to come out, meaning these children, because they saw that a lot of children with special needs
mm,
were living in that area. So they would stroll, and mothers would now have conversation with fellow mothers about taking care of children with disabilities. Unfortunately, government has no particular assistance for them.
yeah.
Sad,
Yeah.
um,
even the houses, none.
Mm,
So that's actually a disappointment, because personally, even before Haiyan devastated us, I am always saying that government is not listening to the people. Government is not really learning from experience, because otherwise, if government is sincere, they could
mm,
have incorporated what's this concerns, because it's not the first time that a strong typhoon devastated an area. Like before Haiyan, there was Hondoy, and there was in CDO, and they were
yeah.
constructing relocation site or housing units. But their concept is one size fits all, because I think it's the easiest way.
Yeah.
So
Sandra? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I
uh,
don't have the same expertise as the professor, but what we didn't talk about was the huge difference between the government housing and
Yeah.
the private housing.
Yes.
And I was really surprised on how big the difference are, because we went to, I can't remember the name, but they had this whole community and a
Yeah.
community for women and all that. So I just
Yeah.
I think, but I'm not sure, but I think there the needs for I don't know, special needs is is taken care of in the private housing, but not in the government housing. Is
Yeah.
that
Like,
yes.
correct?
could I prompt that a bit, Sandra and Bella? Because
Yeah.
earlier we talked about substandard and what
Mm,
does that mean to you now.
Mm.
Uh, but now that you're comparing private funded housing and privately built housing, and you seem
mm,
impressed. Um,
Mm.
what goes into to standard, up to standard, or even quality housing, if you could
Yeah.
call the private housing that way? I mean, could you give us details on that?
um, I guess we talked to the people living there, both in the government built housing and the private housing, and the people in the private housing was just way more positive towards their houses. They sometimes they had water, the houses were better built, um, but also this thing about community. They felt like they were part of a community. It was not just they had a house and they have to live there, and they, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
the houses in the private build, um, yeah, the private build housing just seemed more well built,
Yeah.
and and the people were a lot happier to live there. That was my um, yeah, experience, but I don't know if that's the whole truth. But yeah.
Yeah, just to bring Sandra's answer and Professor Mangada's answer together, we were both actually talking about the same housing area, that's GMA Kapuso,
Yeah.
which to me, even among the private housing, stood out as, really like a cut above, most of what I saw, because there was so much consideration taken, as Sandra mentioned, to community building. So, going back to our audience members' question about, special considerations for PWDs,
Mm,
it's so you take it for granted here in Manila, and I'm sure, especially in Denmark, there's probably so much accessibility worked into your infrastructure. But
mm,
GMA Kapuso, for me, it stood out because there was a ramp to the playground. Because the playground was slightly elevated, there was a
mm,
ramp for whoever might be on a wheelchair who wants to play, or a guardian who wants to accompany who might be on a wheelchair. We definitely did not see that anywhere else. Something so simple, but also bigger things like breastfeeding centers,
mm,
women's centers. Just it's more than just a few houses and a school. There was really consideration taken in terms of space and building
mm,
community infrastructure, which actually the local government also acknowledged. Because one thing the audience might not be aware of either is the the local government was involved in both private and public housing, and there is a bit of tension between the National Housing Authority and the local government, because the local government says if they had it their way, the housing would have been built differently, hence comments like 70% of the housing in Tacloban is substandard. But that really was the intention of the local government, was to make these not just houses, but public spaces. So yeah, that really is a major difference, the consideration taken to actually building a community. We really, I think, that's quite hard in the public housing that we saw, because it really is a lot of houses packed together, and the stress of substandard living. um That was the major difference for me.
Mm.
Um, okay, I don't think we have time to address all of the questions, but something that might be interesting for our listeners to know also is Professor Mangada, I think you might be the best person to answer this. Are there initiatives for disaster preparedness education among the communities that were affected by Yolanda? So to help prepare for future typhoons.
Actually, I think on I think some of the I cannot really say with confidence that they were given DRR awareness, but
Mm.
I can say for teachers and student leaders, like a month after Hayan, there was DRR awareness, etc. But for those who are living in Tacloban North, I cannot confidently say that they were given. But uh, I think it's because if there's no formal education or awareness raising on that area for on DRR in Tacloban North is because the CDRMO mentioned that uh, they are busy. What's this? Securing those people living in the coast to be transferred because they are more exposed to typhoons, strong winds. uh, for them, they have to ensure that all should be evacuated to that area so that they can concentrate their efforts on those people living in the river banks, in the Eastment area. So I'm not really sure if there is DRR. But on my part, I have this program called MADIR, a DRR Sustainable Development Conversation with Mothers and Others. But we choose the mothers, those who are living in river banks, those are residing in coastal areas, those who are also residents of former mining sites and the informal communities. We have not touched the people who are relocated in Tacloban North. I'm not sure if they got formal awareness raising seminar on DRR and the SD. Uh, my assumption is that if government is not providing them, is because they feel that they are safe,
Mm.
but they are not safe with other hazards such as earthquake. They are not also safe about fire because my worry is fire because
Mm.
in Tacloban North, houses are they are constructed by blocks, and I do not know if there is a firewall. That's my worry also. As far as earthquake is concerned, because part of Tacloban North is sitting in the earthquake belt. I forgot that what's the term. Uh,
Mm. Fault
in
line.
that fault in the fault line.
Mhm.
So that's one. That's another that they should look into. And then in terms of diseases,
Mm.
because water is a problem, uh, the comfort rooms, the CR, what's this, septic tanks, they said it's already full, and then the drainage in Tacloban North is a serious concern also because some of the areas are now flooded when rain would come with
Yeah.
season. So these are the things. It's not only we should not only be preparing them for the strong winds, for storm surge, but there are
Mhm.
other hazards and risks that they should be facing, that they are
Mm.
going to face.
Yeah. Um Sadly, we've run out of time. That went by so fast. I thought we would have a lot of time to work with. But before we end, I really did want to hear from both Sandra and Sir Robbie. Having worked on this project as long as we have, and in the week since, at least for me, I know it's been on my mind still, even though we're done working on most of it. Um, any major takeaways? Anything that's been pressing on you in the weeks since we've finished working on this project? I guess any final thoughts you'd like to share before we end?
Um, for me, it's really, I think the main points was communicated very well. And again, we would encourage people, if you haven't listened to the podcast, Bella and Sandra really did a wonderful job on two levels. Of one, reminding people that at the end of the day, this is a human story. And at
Mm,
the end of the day, this is about communities. We were looking for the data just to give it really that hard edge, right? That we're trying to be as objective about this as possible. And I think just the fact that the data was actually quite hard to get and also convoluted even when you got it, and even government officials and even NGOs and academics were all saying we could pretty much know how big the funds that were pledged, how much were specific to housing. We can pretty much know how funds were spent for public housing, some for private housing, and you don't even need to get to any kind of a conclusion, let's say about corruption, or I
mm,
don't know, you can leave some questions and you're
Mm,
still left with a very clear and I think objective conclusion that it just wasn't spent as best as it should have been.
mm,
And even before spending, it wasn't even planned as best as it could have been. It wasn't as well considered, well consulted, and now people are still paying that price. Whether you put it in the hundreds of millions of dollars or $1 billion, the reality is people did not get their money's worth.
mm,
My takeaway, however, is still on, how could how could that be improved? Not
mm,
just for not just for tracking money, but just so there is accountability on all sides, not just the beneficiaries of the housing, but
mm,
even accountability, as I said, to the citizens on the other side of the world that
mm,
that that gave their taxpayer money for to help Filipinos in need. And
yeah,
I think that's a there's a there are conversations and questions that will continue on both sides, as Sandra said, on the structural side. And
mm.
when we say structural, it simply should be that it shouldn't be that difficult to answer some of these basic questions.
yeah. Sandra?
I think Robbie said it all, but um, I thought a lot about it these days because of COP28. 10 years ago, I can't remember his name, but Yep Sano, I think
Yeah.
he's stood on the stage at a COP in Warszawa and
Mm,
talked about Haiyan and how it's time for all world leaders to step up and pay the price because the northern countries or the western countries pollute way more and it affects the global south. And I just think here, 10 years later, nothing has really changed. And so I think we need to have this conversation about how we solve this inequality in climate changes and how we can build a system that is transparent and
yeah.
um, yeah, and all that. So for me, it's more a systemic structural issues here that we need to talk about and how we can move forward with better ways to help, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that is a great way to wrap up the discussion, very conveniently. That's also how the series kind of ends is, this reflection on, you know, how how this is also a climate issue,
It is.
so that quote of Yeb Sano that you mentioned, that I still think about that all the time. That's one of the
Mhm.
things that has stayed with me in the weeks since working on this story. So on that note, I really want to thank everyone who joined us for this slightly more than an hour long discussion. Thank you, Professor Mangada, Sandra, Sir Robbie. If you haven't heard the mini series yet, you can find it on the Teka Teka News channel, wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also just search up 10 Years After Hayan, wherever you listen to your podcasts. I really, really encourage everyone to check it out. One of the things that really stayed with me is the personal stories, and we feature a lot of those across the series. I think about them every day. So I really hope everyone gives it a listen. If you want to keep updated on other stories we're working on, follow Teka Teka on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. Yeah, thank you so much
Thank
to
you.
everyone who watched and everyone who participated. I really appreciate it.
Hmm. Maraming salamat po.
Salamat.
Thank you.
Bye.
Salamat.
Thank you.